to Jake's Cinema Room. Today, I am going to be giving you guys a new ranking video where I take a look at the entirety of the Scream franchise. Scream's been in the news a little bit recently as they just officially greenlit Part 7, and they're going to be moving forward with that. It's going to be coming out in February of 2026. Kind of a weird date, but hey, I'm looking forward to it despite all of the controversy that surrounded that movie. But yeah, I'm going to go through the entirety of the Scream franchise, give my rankings from worst to best, and talk a little bit about each individual film. Now, I did cover the entire series last year leading up to Part 6, so I do have full reviews of each movie on my channel if you guys want to check them out. These rankings will include a little bit of spoilers, so if you haven't seen all of the movies in the series, there's going to be a little bit of spoilers here and there, so just be careful what you listen to if you haven't seen the series. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Coming in at number 6, I have Scream 3 from 2000. Scream 3 has always been the worst movie in the franchise for me. It just, in comparison, especially to that original trilogy, it does not stack up well against Part 1 and Part 2. It deviates a lot from what made those two movies so good. It adds in some characters that aren't all that engaging, despite adding in a few characters that are pretty memorable, like Parker Posey as the Gale Weathers stand-in for the new Stab movie that they're filming. But it also has some things that don't really work, that did work really well in the first two movies, like Courtney Cox and David Arquette. Part 3 to me is two of their worst performances I've seen in any of the Scream movies. And Neve Campbell, unfortunately, was filming something else at the time, so her role in the movie is very limited, which is kind of a disappointment considering the movie still revolves very heavily around her. But the main reason I really dislike Part 3 is the final reveal of who is the killer. Now, originally, it was supposed to be two killers. This is the only movie in the film where it actually ends up only being one killer. It's Roman Bridger, the director of the new Stab movie, and they have this whole convoluted plot line where he is actually Sidney's long-lost brother, and he was upset because their mother abandoned him and slept with like Billy Loomis's father and all that. It's so stupid, and I absolutely hate it. I forget the actor's name, but I do not like the guy that plays Roman. I think he's terrible in the role. And there's a point in the movie where his character is pronounced dead, pretty much. Like Courtney Cox checks his pulse, and he's dead. Now, I know there's ways you can slow down your heart rate and things like that, but it gets to a point where it's just really ridiculous. And that on top of just a lot of other things in the movie that don't really work, it's unfortunately, without question, the worst in the entire series. Now, moving on, at number 5, I have Scream 4, which was the first movie after 11 years after Part 3. This one came out in 2011 and is unfortunately the last movie directed by the great Wes Craven. Now, Part 4, I think, definitely is a step up from Part 3. It still has some inconsistencies that I'm not a big fan of. For one, it is horribly lit. Like, I don't know what kind of cameras or what kind of lighting they're doing with this movie, but this movie looks like shit, which is unfortunate because, for it to be Wes Craven's last movie, it would have been nice for the movie to look a little bit nicer, but there's just something going on in this movie where it looks absolutely terrible. You also have a group of new kids in this one, and pretty much all of them are unmemorable, with the exception of Hayden Panettiere, who plays Kirby. The rest of the cast really just doesn't do anything. You do have Emma Roberts that plays Sidney's cousin, I believe, or niece. I think it's cousin. And she, eventually ends up being one of the two Ghostface in the movie. But her performance throughout the movie is very unmemorable. When she is revealed, she, just like everybody in the series, she ramps up the craziness. And I don't really buy it, although I do appreciate her final trying to kill herself or, hurt herself badly. So she's basically kicking her own ass at the end of this movie. That always gives me a good laugh. But this movie was a nice, kind of return to Woodsboro. It was nice to see Neve Campbell, David Arquette, and Courtney Cox once again. I do think their performances in this movie are a definite step up from what they were put putting out in part 3. I do like some of the other additions of other characters, and you have a lot of character actors in this movie and comedic actors that play little roles, like Anthony Anderson, Adam Brody, Marley Shelton, Allison Brie. All of them and their limited screen time, I think, do pretty well in their roles. And this one does have some of the better kills in the series, I think, at least a couple of them. But overall, the gore's ramped up a good bit. I do kind of like that this is playing into the movies at the time where it's a lot of remakes and a lot of torture porn and things like that. So I do like the movie calls out the state of horror at this point in time, which wasn't all that great. And it would take a few more years before horror really kind of kicked back into gear. So it is a step up from part 3, but unfortunately is still one of the lesser movies in the series. Now, moving on to part 4, I have Scream 2. This is a movie I always kind of go back and forth on. There's elements of it I do really enjoy, but it is a very long movie. It's like just over 2 hours. Doesn't really need to be. There's some new characters that I'm not a huge fan of, and basically for every movie, with the exception of the first movie, I think the final reveal of the ghost face all hit with a thud. And this is no different. I do like the aspect of Billy Loomis's mom being one of the ghost face. However, the character of Mickey, played by Timothy Olyphant, I think is a terrible choice as the other ghost face. I wish they would have went with the original script for this one, which was actually Jerry O'Connell's character, who was the boyfriend of Sydney in the movie, and then her roommate, I believe the actress's name is Elise Neal, who plays Hallie. It was supposed to be them two along with Mrs. Loomis, which I think would have made for a much more interesting dynamic. But them having it be Mickey, who is a character who, after the scene where Derek sings his heart out to Sydney in the lunchroom, he's not in the movie until it gets revealed that he's Ghostface. So he's out of the movie for like 45 minutes to an hour, and then all of a sudden he's Ghostface. It makes no sense. It's kind of a dumb, reveal. This is the movie that infamously kills off Jamie Kennedy's character, Randy, who was a fan favorite from the original. It's kind of deserved, I think, but he was a character that is sadly missed throughout the rest of this series. Some of his quips and stuff would have been nice to see. But everybody else here is doing a pretty good job. I do think this is actually one of the better performances from Courtney Cox. David Arquette is good in the role as well. And then Neve Campbell, without question, this is definitely one of her best performances in the series by far. So it is a worthy entry in the series, but with the addition of some of the new ones, I actually think they surpass this one overall. Now, moving on to number 3, I have Scream 2022, or Scream 5, or 5 Cream, if you want to get real creative. This was the requel, or remake sequel that they put out just a couple years ago, and I thought this was a nice return to form for the series. Unfortunately, Wes Craven passed away, so he had no involvement with this. But I do like Radio Silence, who came in and took over the directorial duties of this movie, and I think they knock it out of the park with this one. Like, it is a solid follow-up to the series. It's a great legacy sequel, which this movie plays a lot into, where it's kind of a remake, but it's a continuation of the storyline. So, they're calling that out a lot through this movie, but it introduces a group of new kids who I think have a lot more personality than some of the previous movies. When some of them eventually meet their demise, I think it hits a little bit harder than, especially like some of the kids in part 4 who I couldn't care less about. And it introduces a new dynamic where, you finally have the legacy characters coming back: Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Neve Campbell. One of them finally bites it. We do see Dewey unfortunately meet his demise, but despite the person that does kill him, that whole thing is kind of ridiculous. His death is, kind of saddening, because this is a character we've watched for so many years, and for him to finally pass on and everything, it kind of sucks. But I think this movie, ramps up the gore, it ramps up the tension. It does unfortunately play a little too closely to the original, with this being a requel. It does lean into that really heavily, where the final reveal is, it's the main girl's boyfriend, and then, oh, it's also the girl that just happens to live at Stu Macher's house. What are the chances of that? So it is a little predictable in that regard, but I do like the additions of Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega to this cast. I like them being the leads of this like kind of newish part of the franchise, and I think they do really well here. I just wish the finale of this would have been a little bit more engaging, but overall, I think it works more than it doesn't. Getting into number two, I have Scream 6. Yes, you could probably say it's recency bias, but I saw this movie in theaters, really dug it at the time, and just recently watched it again for the first time, and I still think it holds up. I love the change of the scenery, this going to New York. I like the setting here, getting out of Woodsboro and things like that. I like bringing back the core four from the previous movie, and just the way this movie is set up overall, I think it works really well. It does, again, kind of lean a little too much into, hey, this is part two of this new part of the franchise, so we're going to emulate, part two from the original movie where, oh, it's the parent of the previous person that was Ghostface, and then, oh, he has two kids, and yada, yada, yada. Again, kind of hits with a thud when you get to the finale of this movie. But everything leading up to it, I think, works really well. The Ghostface in this is a lot grittier. The tension is ramped up really well, like the whole scene in the bodega where you have Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega running from Ghostface, who has a shotgun, which is something he never typically uses in movies. That was really cool to see. I love them bringing back Kirby, Hayden Panettiere. It's great to see her back in the role once again. This is the only movie in the series, as of now, that Neve Campbell didn't return because of dispute over some money issues. But honestly, it doesn't feel like the movie really misses her. And I would say actually kind of a slight downside to the movie is that they do bring back Courtney Cox, which is fine, but it doesn't really feel like her character is all that necessary. You probably could have taken her out of the movie as well, and it wouldn't really have that much impact. Although her one big scene in the movie is entertaining and nice to see, it just doesn't really seem all that necessary. But I was pleasantly surprised with this entry in the franchise, and unfortunately it doesn't look like we're going to get a continuation of this story now that Part 7 is not going to have Jenna Ortega or Melissa Barrera. So, here's hoping Part 7 figures out a way to revitalize the franchise and move in a different direction, but only time will tell. And getting into the number one spot, obviously it is the OG 1996 Scream. This movie is without question one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's so inventive, it's so good, and for the time that it came out, it did so many things that you just didn't see in movies, especially horror movies at the time. It subverts your expectations. The whole opening sequence, killing off Drew Barrymore, putting a notable face at the beginning and killing them off and setting it up to a point where it's like, hey, anybody in this movie could die. You don't know who's going to make it to the end. I love that aspect of it. The cast of characters is great, from Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette. The mainstays, they're all great, but the people that are only in, this first movie, like Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lillard, they are both fantastic and are easily the two best ghost faces in the entire series. And then you have like Rose McGowan, who's really good in the movie, as well as Jamie Kennedy, who I think is great comic relief, along with Matthew Lillard, who is my all-time favorite character out of the Scream series. He by far is just so insane in this movie. He's funny, but once the reveal happens, he's quite menacing, and you never really know what's going to happen in the movie. It plays into a lot of horror tropes, but it calls out a lot of the same tropes at the same time. So this was just a movie really ahead of its time, and I love what Wes Craven was able to do with this. The script by Kevin Williamson was fantastic, and it stands the test of time. Not only is it one of my all-time favorite horror movies, but it is widely regarded as one of the best horror movies of all time, and there's a reason for that. But yeah, that's about it for me, guys. Let me know what you think of the Scream franchise. Let me know your rankings down in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more reviews, rankings, my segment Underrated and Overlooked, and more coming in the near future. I'll leave my links down below on where you can follow me and check out more of my reviews. And until next time, I will catch you all later.